Welcome to Voices United in Education podcast. Today we are with the Superintendent of Escambia County Public Schools. Let's join Meredith Hackworth-Edwards with her guest today.
One of the goals of this podcast is to get to know the people behind the titles in the school district. Because it's hard to join hands with a stranger, but come together with our neighbors, that's something Pensacola does really well. When we can see each other as neighbors in the real world and not avatars in a virtual one, we'll be in a better position to come together for the success of every child in our community. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce you to my next guest. He's the superintendent of Escambia County Schools, but he's also a husband, a dad, and an outdoorsman. Today, he's not only going to get to talk about the future of the district, but also who he is outside of work. Maryland to Florida, social studies to superintendent, the man behind the title and the tie, Dr. Tim Smith. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, grew up in Maryland.
Yes.
Undergrad in Delaware, off to Florida State, worked in Central Florida. Now you live in Pensacola, Florida. I think the important question here is, where do your football loyalties lie?
Oh, that's a good question. I am a Tampa Bay Buccaneer fan.
Okay.
When I lived in Florida a few years, I decided I needed to make that switch, and I've been a supporter ever since. I am a big Florida State fan and a UCF fan as well.
Oh, wow. Well, okay, I'll let those things slide. Actually, to be truthful, I'm not a big football person at all, but I'm sure some of our listeners are. So now they know where you stand with that.
Yes.
And your major at University of Delaware was business, but what made you decide to switch to education when you went to Florida State?
Well, I started working out in the business world and quickly realized that it really wasn't the match that I was looking for, and felt a tug to go into education. Had thought about that earlier in my years, and decided to go into business really to make sure I could get a job when I graduated from college, and just wasn't sure what my future had in store. But once in the business world, I quickly realized that education was where I needed to go. So I looked into going back to school to get a master's and teacher certification at the same time, and Florida State could do that. They could offer such a program, and lo and behold, I became a Seminole.
Lo and behold.
Yes.
Did you continue working while you got your master's degree?
So I decided to go ahead and just go full-time and do it as fast as I could. So I started one summer, went the whole year, finished up in the summer, and was then teaching and working that fall. So I was about 14 months, the program.
Diverging from business could lead you in a lot of different directions. Is there a specific reason that you felt the pull of education?
I think for me, what it was is trying to make an impact on young people, and taking the knowledge and skills that I had acquired through school and trying to share that and impart that and work with young people.
That's amazing. Well, between Delaware and Florida State, you also backpacked to Europe, and that was before GPS and cell phone and couch surfing apps, right?
I did, yes.
What made you decide to do that?
A friend of mine, he and I, we were looking at our future and said, we ought to do this because we will never get the opportunity to do it again. And so upon graduation, we worked as many hours as we could, saved up some money, and purchased a Eurail pass, and we traveled through trains, went through 9 different countries on a backpacking trip. It was a great adventure. Saw a lot of really neat places, unique cultures, different languages. It was a fantastic trip. Really glad we did that. And he was rather fortuitous in his statement, because he was right. I never would have had that opportunity to do that again. And so it was really a wise thing when I look back that we did, because we had the chance to do it and we did it.
Any specific countries stand out in your memory from that trip?
Oh, a number of them. I would say Switzerland stood out, we were in a town called Interlaken, one of the most scenic places I've ever been in the world. The beaches in Portugal were incredible. We were able to go through parts of Italy and a bit off the path, the beaten path. So saw some unique places there. It was spectacular.
Oh, I can imagine. I think traveling gives people perspective that I'm really not convinced you can get anywhere else. Is there any specific perspectives or life lessons that you remember taking away from, what was it, 7 weeks?
Yes. So I think what I learned a lot in that travel was how people could come together and interact. We met on the trains. There were quite a number of travelers on the trains, and we met a number of people from all over Europe. And we traveled a little bit with a couple people from Holland, from Sweden, and you just met all kinds of people. We spent a lot of time in youth hostels because that was the most inexpensive way to have lodging. So we took advantage of that. And it was just this coming together of people from all around the world. So it was fascinating to see that and to interact with people of different cultures and just see people too unified and uniting in a common notion of traveling and seeing new places. It was really fantastic. I also noticed too that we in America live in a much newer place than some of these very, very old cities in Europe, and seeing the difference in the geography and how small towns operated and a lot of people walked because they could, and just comparing that to our cultures and it was fascinating to see that.
It is amazing. Did either of you speak any other languages other than English?
Well, I knew a little Spanish, enough to tell people that I didn't really know how to speak in Spanish.
That's fair. That's important.
And my buddy knew a little Italian, but about the same amount. So we were definitely exploring being in a land with language that we didn't understand.
Being a foreigner is actually a really valuable perspective, I think, because you learn. When I learned other languages, the first thing that I noticed is that I could say what I wanted to say with fewer words. And so yes. I realized that all the filler words that I wanted to communicate normally in English were not necessary. I also learned what it means to not belong to a group immediately. The valuable experience of feeling awkward, and an outsider, feeling like an outsider. All of those are really good things. So yes. I'm glad that you got to do that.
Yeah, and I was able to entertain some people. I remember purchasing a loaf of bread, and I think I said un baguette, and the people behind the counter just started laughing.
Oh no!
Because the way I said, I was trying. I don't know how it came across, but it was entertaining to them. So
yeah.
that was
laughing at yourself. This is also an important lesson.
Absolutely. And I think that's another thing that I learned too, is the appreciation for being able to communicate, mm-hmm. to hear, to speak, to interact with people, where beforehand I just took that for granted. That just was a reality that I never really thought about. But having that experience really garnered an appreciation within me of being able to enjoy that ability. I never cherished my hearing or my ability to speak with another person as much as I did on that trip. We kind of ended our travel in England and Ireland, and so we could then freely speak because of the common language, and it was a noticeable difference in just how you interacted with people. It was much more seamless because you didn't have to pull out your translation book or whatever to to have a conversation with somebody. So gained a lot of appreciation for that.
Yeah, one that, again, you can only get when you go outside of your neighborhood, for sure.
Yes.
So you schooled, you traveled, you schooled some more, found love. I think schooled even more after that for your PhD. There's a lot of schooling, raised some kiddos, and now you're here.
Yes.
So what does a superintendent do exactly?
Well, it's a fantastic opportunity to really lead a school district in a community for the future of kids. And one of the reasons I went back to school, I went to the University of Central Florida late in my career. I was the oldest guy in the doctoral cohort, and which was an experience in itself, just being the old guy. But I did that because my youngest child had left for college, and I was a high school principal at the time, and I just wasn't going to do that with my kids at home because being a high school principal was busy enough. But when she went off to college, I said, well, I'm going to do this now or I'm not going to do it. And really what pushed me to do that is I had a couple of mentors who wouldn't stop pinging me saying, you need to do this. This is something you should do. And they kind of got me thinking. But what really led me to do it was a tug, a calling that it was time to look at leading on a larger scale, where my hope and my quest is to do good work, to lead in a way that benefits more and more students and have our young people embrace great opportunities because of the learning and the experience that they have in public school.
Which is something you felt like you couldn't do at scale as a principal, only as a superintendent.
I felt I could do that within the school that I ran, but the tug was to do that on a wider scale.
What does that look like in your day-to-day activities then?
Well, one of the things as a superintendent is the mind is always looking at what's the best for our students. And we have a significantly sized organization with over 5,000 employees and about 36,000 students. So decisions are important because they impact a lot of people. The key is making the right decisions, but in a framework, a large framework that leads us into the right direction. So when I talk about that, that can look many different ways. So if you take learning, those decisions are that might impact instruction. So is that moving in the right direction that's going to impact the most students? If you look in our finances, are we making financial decisions that are sound, that are balanced, where we're not spending too much or we're not spending enough, but we're spending on the right things that make a difference? And if we're renovating a building, how fast can we do that? How much money goes into that? How does that impact our community and our kids? In our human resources, how can we do things that are beneficial to our employees? How do we recruit and attract employees to our profession, which I will tell you right now is our greatest challenge, is the labor shortage. It really has impacted us. But fortunate for the people of Escambia County, we have an excellent human resource department who they just never stop. And we have principals and assistant principals who will think outside of the box and they do what's necessary. And we have teachers who will do whatever it takes for their kids. And then you have all the support employees who are right there chiming in, what can I do to help? How can I help? And then going to work and doing it. So we're very fortunate because what makes the district run are the people working in our schools and our district departments every day.
It sounds like you're the coach of the team, basically.
It's good analogy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's the only sports analogy I got. So I hope everyone enjoyed it, because there won't be any more. That's all I can do. Malcolm Thomas was the superintendent before you since 2008. And then you were appointed in 2020, quite a year to take on that role. What existing things are you building on, and what new things are you working to create?
That's been one of the more challenging questions. Beginning this past school year, which was the 21-22 year, the timing was right to really move forward with some initiatives. The timing suddenly wasn't right about the first weekend of school when we had a massive COVID spike.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Take place, yes.
Yeah.
And so that impacted us in August and then into September, to the point where we needed to close down access to schools. We canceled open house. We restricted our volunteers from coming onto campus just to mitigate COVID spread. What happens there is then principals have to switch their modality from more of instructional leadership, where they're working with teachers and department chairs on instruction and coaching, providing staff development for our teachers so that they can continue to be on the cutting edge. What happened is the principals, I had to have them back off of that work and switch into pure safety and management of COVID. So their contact tracing, you can imagine in a big high school, if a student has been identified as having COVID, then the students that sit around that individual student have to do what we call contact tracing to see if they have any symptoms, communication home. But that has to happen for that one student in all 7 classes, right?
And what did you say, 36,000 students in
Right.
Escambia County Public? And I mean, Pensacola, just city limits, is what, 40,000?
Well, there's
Not surrounding areas, but just Pensacola. So if you think about it, the kids of Escambia County Public could basically occupy city limits of Pensacola. I mean, that's really putting it to scale.
It's a large population of students. So you have your principals and assistant principals and all hands on deck working that, just because safety had to be our number one priority. It's always our number one priority. And so when it is, that's what you do. And so but they didn't have time to do the instructional piece or many of the other tasks. So we had to pull back on some initiatives. And it goes to your point of timing and when you move forward with that and when you have to back off on that. And so in that case, we had to back off on that. Then we got hit with another COVID spike in January. And in January, actually, I believe, because I would monitor the number of staff and students that we had out on COVID, and we had a data tracker that we had plugged in on our website. And I remember in January seeing 4% one day of our district staff, all of our district staff, 4%, that's over 200 employees out on a particular day. That, I believe, was the highest percentage I had seen. And you think about it, that was January. That impacted instructional time tremendously, because if you have a teacher out and a teacher has 120 students, let's say, a day at a secondary school, that's a big impact. But then also the dynamic is you had students who were out as well. So a student might miss instructional time, come back, and then their teacher might be out.
Oh, yeah.
And then substitutes were hard to find because COVID didn't escape them. And so it was quite a tall task for our principals, but they do what they do, and that is they put one foot forward and they get the job done. And so I'm really proud of our staff for going through that experience and doing what was needed for our students to have stability and to continue moving forward with learning, despite challenges that were so unique. We just never had really seen these types of challenges before COVID.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's not like we could call up our great-great-grandparents of, in 1918 and be like, so what did y'all do about this exactly? And plus that wasn't apples to apples. So
it's a great point.
Dr. Smith, king of the pivot, we'll just add that to your resume.
Well, I have to tip my hat to Malcolm Thomas because he had the hardest spot. He had the early phase of COVID, and when the district went to the remote platform, well, the whole state did. And so thank you, Mr. Thomas, for navigating that, because I know that was not easy, and he did a great job with that. And he was an outstanding leader in this district, and I was very fortunate. The board gave me 6 weeks to shadow him and just interact with him, and he taught me so much. I'm really grateful to him for that time.
Well, thank goodness. Thank goodness
Yes.
for all of that.
Yes.
Now, your two themes with the district right now are united and every child. Can you explain the significance of those two things? Of course, this podcast is Voices United in Education, so we're following right along that line, but I think it'd be great to hear it from you.
Well, thank you for bringing up those terms, because they are near and dear to me. I think we live in a time now where the leadership needed from myself is all about unity. We live in some challenging times. There are a lot of dynamics. There are a lot of variables that have really surfaced over the last couple of years, and certainly our society has been impacted with this whole pandemic. And you have an economy now that's fluid. It's moving. We're not sure where it's going to go. In fact, it seems like it's hard to really pinpoint and define the dynamic that is in place. So you have labor shortage. You have people who are looking at just different ways of doing things that may have been very traditional in the past. And so through it all, we have some cultural pieces, I think, in our nation where it's really calling for coalescing, coming together, finding common ground as Americans, and cherishing the freedom that we have, that people have fought for, that people serve. And we have so many good, talented people who have a great heart for our country, and they're serving. And, I look at our local delegation, just incredible people who just invest so many hours in heart and soul into representing us. I look at our school board members who are so passionate about our kids. Our school board members have just great hearts for kids. And I really am honored to work with them and share that drive for having our kids educated and graduating with great opportunities. But what's core to this is us coming together as a community. And we have some heavy lifts as far as some to-dos. And that gets into the every child piece, where we have an achievement gap that we just have to close that gap. Because what that says is that we have some students who are doing very well in our district, and we have some students who are struggling in our district. Our district needs to be one where all of our kids are moving forward, learning and being successful, and they graduate and they're prepared to go forth and do great things. And so that's our charge, is to close those gaps where all of our kids are being reached and connected to. Now, when I say that, that's easy to say, right? Let's close the gap. we in the educational world have been saying that for years.
Yeah.
Because this is not unique to Escambia. It is throughout the state of Florida, and my unscientific sampling indicates that it's nationwide. It's a national education system characteristic. And so then it becomes the question, what do we need to do to close the achievement gap? And so, and I really believe it is doable, but it takes being united, being joined together, coming on common ground that says public education is for all kids, and we want all kids to walk across that stage as a graduating senior with skills and knowledge to go on and be helpful and productive community members.
I'm glad that you said you think that you really believe truly that it's achievable, because as I thought more about the achievement gap and how there hasn't been any school district that we know of that has achieved the closing of that gap, I don't know, inside it started to feel like world peace, like, is this possible? Is this a real goal? So are there certain milestones that we're measuring along the way for this goal?
So that we get those gaps every year. We get the measurement on those gaps.
And how do we measure them?
Through the state testing.
Okay, that's
yes.
Okay.
So in our state testing, we get measures of who is on grade level or above and who is below grade level. And we call those proficiency scores. That's the language associated with our state testing metrics. And so the proficiency is a key measure. So you have some dynamics there where what happens is, as if you have a student who falls behind, how the question then is, how do we provide resource and intervention to pull that student up? Now, one of the huge challenges is that some of our students come in behind on the very first day of public education because there's a measure called kindergarten readiness. So our kindergarten readiness dropped 6%, COVID. We had a fewer pre-K students because it's voluntary, it's optional, and people were concerned about COVID, and a lot of people kept their kids home. So we're going to see that kindergarten readiness drop as a result of that. But that's a key measure. And so when in our district, 42% of our kids this year were ready for kindergarten. So there's an opportunity there of how can we push in the early years before kids even get here. And we have some incredible community leaders who have done great work for that. And I would venture to say, I don't have the measures, but I'd venture to say we have a whole lot more kids who are ready than probably 15 years ago because of what this community has done, what our hospitals are doing, what some of our community leaders are doing. And it's that kind of, that really reflects the unity that I speak of. It's when people come together for a shared common cause that is most worthy. And that's an integral part of us closing the achievement gap, is that unity, and that's an example of it. But there are different points along the student's way that we need to provide more resource. We need to be aggressive in coaching up our kids who are struggling, because I haven't met many kids who enjoy being behind. No,
and it's better to be ready than get ready.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
How will we celebrate the milestones? I'm thinking a parade. We love us a good parade in Pensacola.
I would love a parade.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. I'm not trying to, make you make an announcement right now, but I think a kindergarten readiness parade sounds pretty good to me.
With fireworks.
Ooh,
Yes.
I like that next level. Okay,
Yes.
with fireworks. Well, finally, as we wrap up, what do you want people to know about Escambia County Public Schools?
What comes to mind immediately is the incredible heart that our employees have. I saw that firsthand with COVID. I remember I was at Brentwood Elementary. I hadn't been in the position long, and I walked in the classroom, and the teacher had, I think, 3 or 4 monitors. It was like watching a symphony conductor, because the teacher is teaching students through the computer remotely, but then also has rows of students in the class teaching in person all simultaneously. And that, I think, is so indicative of the heart and the determination and the perseverance and the grit of our employees, where we'll have a teacher assistant who will go above and beyond to support that student, to be a helpful voice for that parent who may be having a tough day, and their student might be struggling, but that assistant is right there to help. Our custodial team, our food service team, our bus drivers. It's just amazing how we'll have bus drivers, they drop off kids and they'll go back and do additional routes and additional routes and additional routes till it's all done. And so that's what sticks out. The other thing that sticks out too is our kids are amazing. And I'm I am the lucky guy. I get to be at every high school graduation and to shake the hand of our graduates. And it's a fantastic moment, because you see kids culminating that K-12 experience, but then you also see them stepping up into a bright future. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the original question of why did I go into education? And that moment resonates with me, because you see just these incredibly excited, youthful people who are going to go on and do great things and be huge contributors to our community, but to communities throughout the world. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.
You're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and really, I'm honored to be the superintendent of this incredible school district and in this incredible county. Thank you.